This happened about 6 years ago when I was 24 years old and fresh out of college. I was drowning in student debt and working whatever jobs I could find to keep my head above water. One of those jobs was as a night security guard at St. Mary's Medical Center, an old hospital on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon that had been shut down for about 5 years. The place was built sometime in the 1950s, and honestly, during the day it just looked like any other abandoned building. But the security company I worked for had a contract to watch it until the demolition crew could come through. The pay was $18 an hour, which was better than anything else I could find, so I took it without thinking twice. I worked the graveyard shift from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 3 nights a week. My first week on the job, I met Tom, the supervisor who had been doing security work for over 20 years. He was about 55, gray hair, tired eyes, the kind of guy who had seen it all. Tom walked me through the building on my first night, showing me the routes I needed to patrol every 2 hours. The hospital was 4 stories tall with a basement level that made my skin crawl the moment we stepped down there. The basement was where they kept the old morgue, record storage, and a long hallway with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps. Tom told me the hospital had closed because of budget cuts, and they had left a lot of old medical equipment behind. Near the morgue, there were about 15 or 20 wheelchairs stacked on top of each other against the wall. They were rusted old, with wheels that looked like they would squeak if you even breathed on them. I asked Tom why they were still there, and he shrugged, said they were too beat up to donate anywhere, so they were just waiting to get thrown out with everything else. Then he said something that stuck with me. He looked at me dead serious and said, "Don't stay down in the basement too long, just check it and get out." I laughed it off at first, but when I asked why, he just muttered, "Old building, makes weird noises." That was all he would say about it. The basement had this smell, like old disinfectant mixed with mold, and something else I could not quite place. The walls were painted this pale green color that was peeling in places, and the morgue door was solid metal, heavy, with a rusted handle. I could see through the small window that there were still a few stainless steel drawer units inside, the kind they used to store bodies. The wheelchairs were lined up just outside that door, and every time I walked past them, the wheels would catch the light in this unsettling way. For the first couple of weeks, everything was fine. I would do my rounds, check all the floors, make sure no one had broken in, and then sit in the security office on the first floor drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone. It was boring work, but it was easy, and I convinced myself the basement was not as creepy as it seemed. Then came that Wednesday night. It was around 1:30 in the morning, and I was sitting in the office, halfway through a cup of gas station coffee, when I heard it. A rolling sound, like wheels on concrete, coming from below me. At first, I thought maybe it was a rat or something dragging trash around, but the sound was too loud, too deliberate. It sounded exactly like someone pushing a wheelchair down that basement hallway. I put my phone down and listened. The sound stopped. Then it started again, slow and rhythmic, like someone was moving methodically from one end of the hall to the other. My heart started beating a little faster, but I told myself it was probably just the pipes or the ventilation system. Tom had said old buildings made weird noises, right? But this did not sound like pipes. This sounded like movement. I grabbed my flashlight and my walkie-talkie and headed for the basement door. The moment I opened it, I felt the temperature drop. It was always colder down there, but this felt different, heavier somehow. I walked down the stairs, my boots echoing on the concrete, and every step felt louder than it should have been. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting shadows that stretched and twisted along the walls. When I reached the bottom, the rolling sound stopped. Just like that. Complete silence except for the hum of those dying lights. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the area where the wheelchairs were stacked. My flashlight beam cut through the dark and I could see them, still piled up against the wall exactly where they had been during my last check 2 hours earlier. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked out of place. I stood there for a minute, just listening, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But then I heard a small click from the far end of the hallway, past the morgue. I turned and shined my light down there, but there was nothing. Just empty hallway and that smell, that awful disinfectant smell that seemed stronger now. I was about to turn back when the rolling sound started again, but this time it was behind me. I spun around fast, my light bouncing off the walls, and I saw it. One of the wheelchairs at the top of the pile was shaking slightly, like someone had just let go of the handles. But there was no one there. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my ears, and I stared at that wheelchair. It was not moving anymore, but I could swear it had been a second ago. That is when things got worse. One of the wheelchairs in the middle of the stack suddenly rolled forward. Not fell, not tipped over. It rolled out smoothly like someone had pulled it free and pushed it. The chair moved about 3 or 4 feet into the middle of the hallway and then stopped. I stood there frozen, watching it. The floor was completely flat. There was no incline, no reason for it to move on its own. My hands started shaking, and I felt this cold wave wash over me, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Then I heard it. From inside the morgue, the sound of metal scraping against metal. It was the drawers. Someone or something was pulling out the stainless steel drawers inside the morgue. I heard it once, then twice, then 3 times in a row, each one louder than the last. The door was closed. I knew it was closed because I had checked it myself earlier. But the sound was unmistakable. I did not wait to hear anything else. I turned and ran. I ran back down that hallway, up the stairs, and I slammed the basement door shut behind me so hard the whole frame shook. I did not stop until I was back in the security office with the door locked. My chest was heaving, my legs felt like jelly, and my hands would not stop shaking. I sat down hard in the chair and looked at the clock. 1:47 in the morning. I still had over 5 hours left on my shift. I tried calling Tom, but he did not pick up. It was the middle of the night. Of course he was asleep. I sat there in that office, staring at the security monitors. The camera in the basement only covered one corner of the hallway, and from what I could see, everything looked normal. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. I did not leave that office for the rest of the night. I sat there, drinking cup after cup of coffee, jumping at every small sound, watching the minutes crawl by on the clock. Every creak, every distant noise made my heart race all over again. By the time 7 in the morning finally came around, I grabbed my jacket and got out of there as fast as I could. The next day, I could not stop thinking about it. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the floor was not as flat as I thought. Maybe there was a draft that moved the wheelchair. Maybe the morgue drawers were just settling, old metal contracting or expanding. But none of it felt right. None of it explained what I had experienced. That afternoon, I ran into Jake at a coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. Jake had been the night guard at St. Mary's before me. He had quit about 3 months before I started, and I had only met him once during my training. When I saw him, I almost did not say anything, but something made me walk over. I sat down across from him and said, "Hey, Jake, can I ask you something about St. Mary's?" He looked up at me, and I swear his face went pale. He said, "You saw something, did not you?" I nodded and told him everything. The rolling wheelchairs, the sound from the morgue, the way that one chair just moved on its own across a flat floor. Jake put his coffee down and leaned back in his chair. He looked tired, like he had not been sleeping well. He said, "Yeah, man, I dealt with that too." He told me that one night he heard someone calling his name from inside the morgue. He said it was clear as day, a voice saying, "Jake, Jake, come here." But when he opened the door, there was nothing inside. Another time, he saw a shadow of a person walk past the far end of the hallway, but when he ran down there, no one was there. He checked every room, every closet. Nothing. And then he told me about his last night. He said he went down for his 2 in the morning check, and all the wheelchairs that had been stacked against the wall were lined up in a perfect row down the center of the hallway. He said he had checked that same hallway 30 minutes earlier, and they had all been stacked normally. Jake told me he reported it to Tom, but Tom just gave him the same line, "Old building. weird sounds. You will get used to it, but Jake never did. He quit the next day. He looked at me and said, "Do not work nights there anymore. Find something else. Trust me." I went home and thought about it all day. I could not explain any of it. Not the wheelchair rolling on a flat surface. Not the sound of those morgue drawers opening when the room was locked. Not the way everything felt so wrong down there. I called the security company that evening and asked if I could switch to day shifts or get assigned to a different site. They told me the only position they had available was the night shift at St. Mary's. If I did not want it, I would have to quit. I thought about the money. I thought about my student loans. But then I thought about sitting in that basement again, hearing those sounds, seeing things I could not explain, so I quit. I found another job a week later. It paid less, but it was normal. No creepy hospitals. No basements full of rusted wheelchairs. No sounds that should not exist. About 2 weeks after I quit, I heard that the demolition crew had finally started tearing down St. Mary's. I felt a strange sense of relief when I heard that, like maybe whatever was down there would finally be gone. But even now, 6 years later, I still think about that night sometimes. I drive past the empty lot where the hospital used to be, and I remember the sound of those wheels rolling in the dark. I remember the cold, the fear, the way my hands shook when I ran up those stairs. I have never told anyone else about it except Jake. People would not believe me anyway. They would say I imagined it, that I was tired, that old buildings play tricks on you. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard. And I know that some things cannot be explained, no matter how hard you try. Money is important, sure, but peace of mind is worth a whole lot more. This happened to me around the turn of the millennium in northern Canada. Back then, there weren't cell phones in every pocket and no easy way for people to call unless you found a pay phone or a lucky passing driver. I was in my late 20s, working night shifts at a fish processing plant on the outskirts of town. The place was about 15 miles from the nearest residential area, surrounded by nothing but frozen fields and empty access roads. My shift ran from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, and most nights it was just me, Mike the shift supervisor, and Dave, another line worker. The factory was enormous, with high ceilings and metal walkways that created strange echoes when anyone moved around. On a typical night, we'd see maybe one delivery truck around 4 in the morning, but otherwise we were completely isolated. It was a Tuesday in early January, and the temperature outside had dropped to around -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the plant, it wasn't much warmer except near the machinery. We'd been working together for about 3 months by then, and the routine had become familiar. Clock in, grab coffee, check the equipment, and start the conveyor lines. By 3:15 that morning, we were on our scheduled break, sitting in the small break room with its flickering fluorescent lights and a space heater that barely worked. Mike was telling us about his weekend ice fishing trip while Dave scrolled through an old hunting magazine. I was nursing my second cup of coffee, trying to wake up enough to make it through the rest of the shift. The only sounds were our voices, the distant hum of refrigeration units, and the occasional groan of pipes expanding and contracting in the cold. That's when we heard it, 3 sharp, deliberate knocks on the metal door that led to the cold storage area. The sound echoed through the break room and we all stopped mid-conversation. Mike set down his coffee and stood up. "Someone needs something," he called out. We waited, but there was no answer. The cold storage door was about 30 feet down the hallway from where we sat, and nobody was supposed to be working in that section during our shift. Dave leaned back in his chair and said, "Probably just the wind making the door rattle." I nodded, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Those storage doors were heavy, industrial-grade steel, and they didn't rattle easily. Mike walked to the doorway of the break room and looked down the hall. "Nothing there," he said, sitting back down. We returned to our conversation about weekend plans, and I tried to convince myself that Dave was right. Maybe the wind had caught something outside. But my coffee suddenly tasted bitter, and I found myself glancing toward the hallway more often than I wanted to admit. About 15 minutes later, Dave and I headed back to the main processing line to finish packing the night's quota. Mike went to inspect the cold storage area just to be sure everything was secure. The processing floor was vast, with stainless steel tables running in long rows under bright work lights. Dave and I worked at adjacent stations, the monotonous rhythm of sealing and labeling packages filling the silence. I could see Mike through the frosted glass window of the storage room door, checking temperature gauges and clipboards. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway behind us. The sound was unmistakable, boot heels striking the concrete floor in a steady cadence. I turned around, expecting to see Mike walking back, but he was still visible through the window, nowhere near us. Dave had heard it too. He stopped working and looked at me. "You hear that?" I nodded. We both shut off our machines and listened. The footsteps continued for maybe 5 or 6 more seconds, then stopped abruptly. We walked over to the hallway entrance and peered down the corridor. It was empty. The lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows, but there was nobody there. Dave forced a laugh. "Maybe it's the ghost from the last shift, forgot to clock out." I tried to smile, but my hands felt cold despite my work gloves. We went back to the line, but I kept turning around to check the hallway every few minutes. By 4 in the morning, Mike had returned to the break room and I told him about the footsteps. He frowned and said he hadn't heard anything while he was in storage. "Could be sound traveling from upstairs," he suggested. "Sometimes the pipes make weird noises." I knew the administrative offices on the second floor were empty at night, locked up tight with nobody scheduled to be there. But I didn't argue. We all went back to work, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. Around 4:30, I had to go to the small supply closet to grab more packaging material. The closet was tucked into a corner near the loading dock, away from the main work area. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, reaching for the light switch. That's when I heard breathing. Heavy, ragged breathing right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the box I was holding. Nobody was there. The hallway outside the closet was empty. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead despite the cold. I grabbed what I needed and practically ran back to where Dave and Mike were working. I didn't tell them what happened. I was afraid they'd think I was losing it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been standing right behind me. Around 5 in the morning, all three of us were working together in the main packing area, trying to finish the last batch before the morning crew arrived. That's when the lights in the cold storage room suddenly turned on. We all saw it through the window, the bright fluorescent tubes flooding the space with harsh white light. Mike looked at Dave, then at me. "Who went in there?" Nobody answered because none of us had moved from our stations. Mike set down his tools and started walking toward the storage room. Dave followed him and I stayed behind, watching them disappear down the hallway. The seconds ticked by slowly. I was alone in the vast processing area, and that's when I heard metal clanging from somewhere above me. I looked up at the overhead walkways and hanging chains used for moving heavy equipment. Nothing was moving, but the sound had been clear. I felt my skin prickle. Mike and Dave came back a minute later, both looking confused. "Nobody's in there," Mike said. But the light switch was flipped on. The door was still locked from the outside. Dave's voice had lost its earlier humor. "This is getting weird, man." Mike tried to rationalize it, suggesting maybe there was an electrical short, but his voice lacked conviction. We decided to stick together and not wander off alone for the rest of the shift. The plant suddenly felt much larger and more threatening than it ever had before. At 5:30 in the morning, with just 30 minutes left before we could leave, we started cleaning up our stations early. We were all ready to get out of there. Then the knocking started again. But this time it wasn't 3 polite taps. It was continuous, rapid pounding on that same metal door. Boom, 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 over and over, echoing through the entire factory. Mike shouted, "Who's there? Answer me." The pounding stopped instantly. Then we heard running. Fast, heavy footsteps sprinting down the hallway, boots slamming against the concrete in a frantic rhythm. Mike ran to the light panel and flooded the hallway with every light available. The three of us grabbed flashlights and rushed toward the sound. The hallway was completely empty, not a person in sight. Dave's face had gone pale. "I'm done." I'm not staying here another minute. Mike and I agreed. As we turned to go back and grab our coats and lunch boxes, we saw something that made us all freeze. Every single machine we had shut down earlier was running. Conveyor belts moving, lights blinking, motors humming. And the cold storage door, which we had confirmed was closed and locked, stood wide open. Cold air poured out into the hallway, creating a fog that rolled across the floor. None of us said anything for several seconds. We just stood there, staring. Mike finally broke the silence. "We're leaving right now." We didn't bother with our usual end-of-shift routine. We just grabbed our personal belongings and headed for the exit. We moved as a group, nobody wanting to be left behind. As we reached the main entrance, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Someone called my name. It was distant, muffled, and I couldn't tell if it was a man's voice or a woman's voice, but it was definitely calling my name. I stopped walking. "Did you guys hear that?" Mike and Dave both nodded, their eyes wide. The voice called again, clearer this time, closer. It seemed to be coming from deeper inside the plant. Dave didn't wait. "Run!" We burst through the doors and into the parking lot. Snow was falling lightly, and the cold air hit my face like a slap. We ran to our vehicles, not looking back at the building. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, I saw all the lights inside the factory flickering on and off in a chaotic pattern. I fumbled with my car keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I started the engine and sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath and slow my racing heart. The next morning, I called Mike from home. He told me the day shift had come in and found everything normal, except that all the machines had been left running. The shift supervisor from the morning crew didn't understand why we'd left everything on. Mike, Dave, and I met with the plant manager later that day and told him what had happened. He was skeptical but agreed to check the security cameras. When we reviewed the footage together, it showed exactly what we'd experienced. Lights turning on and off, doors opening and closing, machines starting by themselves. But there was nobody else in the building. No person, no animal, nothing that could explain it. The footage was clear and time-stamped. The manager had no explanation. He suggested maybe it was an electrical malfunction, but even he didn't sound convinced. I requested a transfer to the day shift immediately. Dave quit the job altogether and found work at a grocery store in town. Mike continued working nights but made sure there were always at least 4 people on shift after that. The plant closed down a year later due to financial troubles, and the building sat empty for a long time. I moved to a different town shortly after and found work in construction. To this day, I don't know what we experienced that night. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to find logical explanations, but nothing fits. What I do know is that all 3 of us heard the same things, saw the same things, and felt the same terror. Whatever was in that factory that night, it wanted us to know it was there. I never worked a night shift alone again, and I'm grateful we all made it out safely. Some things just can't be explained, and maybe they're not meant to be. I worked the evening shift at Mercy General Hospital, 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night. It was July in Central Florida, which meant the heat didn't quit even after the sun went down. By the time I clocked out, it was still 85 degrees and muggy as hell. I didn't own a car back then. 26 years old, living paycheck to paycheck, putting away what I could. So I biked home every night, a solid 30-minute ride through the suburban sprawl on the east side of town. Honestly, I didn't mind it most nights. There was something peaceful about the ride. The roads were empty, the air was heavy and still, and I liked the solitude after spending 8 hours surrounded by beeping monitors and anxious families. The route took me through a neighborhood that was still being developed. Half-finished houses, construction equipment sitting idle, and long stretches where the streetlights hadn't been installed yet. It felt like riding through a ghost town. I'd been making this trip for about 6 months, and it had become my routine, my time to decompress. The road I took cut straight through the heart of the construction zone. The first mile or so had streetlights, normal suburban stuff, but once I passed the turnoff near the elementary school, things got darker. The developers had cleared the land but hadn't finished the infrastructure. There were skeletal frames of houses on either side, piles of lumber, and heavy machinery casting long shadows. The asphalt was torn up in places from all the trucks that rumbled through during the day. Potholes everywhere. Tonight was especially brutal. No breeze at all, just thick, soupy air that clung to my skin. Sweat soaked through my scrubs within the first 10 minutes. I kept my hands tight on the handlebars, eyes focused on the dim stretch of road ahead. The only sounds were the rhythmic click of my bike chain and my own breathing. My legs burned from the effort, but I was used to it. I thought about the shift I'd just finished. A rough one. We'd lost a patient in the ICU, an older man who'd been hanging on for days. It always hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I was tired, physically and emotionally. All I wanted was to get home, take a cold shower, and collapse into bed. I figured I had maybe 10 more minutes before I'd see the lights of my apartment complex up ahead. Then it happened. My front tire hit something I couldn't see in the darkness. A deep pothole, maybe 6 inches across. The impact was instant and violent. The bike lurched hard to the right and I felt the handlebars twist in my grip. I tried to correct, pulling back, but the wheel was stuck, jammed into the hole. My body kept moving forward. There was this split second where I knew I was going down, but I couldn't stop it. I flew over the handlebars, my hands reaching out instinctively. My left shoulder hit the pavement first, then my head. The sound of the impact echoed in the quiet night. Sharp, loud, wrong. Pain exploded through my shoulder and radiated down my arm. I landed face down, my cheek pressed against the asphalt that still held the heat from the day. The bike crashed on top of me, the pedal digging into my calf, the front wheel spinning uselessly in the air. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. Just this horrible, empty feeling in my chest. Then the air rushed back in, and with it came the pain. My head throbbed. I reached up with my right hand and felt something warm and wet on my forehead. Blood. My fingers came away slick with it. I tried to push myself up, but my left shoulder screamed in protest. I collapsed back down, gasping. The bike was still on top of me, trapping my leg. I shoved it off with my good arm, and it clattered to the side. I lay there in the middle of the road, staring at the cracked pavement inches from my face. It was so quiet. No cars, no voices, nothing. Just me and the darkness and the blood dripping into my eye. I tried to sit up again, slower this time. The world tilted. My vision blurred and a wave of nausea hit me so hard I thought I was going to throw up. I managed to get onto my side, then stopped, breathing hard. My left arm hung useless. Every time I moved it, pain shot through my shoulder like a hot knife. The blood from my forehead was running down into my eyes now, making it hard to see. I wiped at it with my right hand, smearing it across my face. My phone. I needed my phone. It was in the pocket of my scrub top. I fumbled for it, fingers shaking. When I finally got it out, my heart sank. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks spreading across the glass. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I pressed it again, harder, still nothing. Dead. I let it drop onto the pavement beside me. That's when the fear really started to settle in. I was lying in the middle of the road, in the dark, in a part of town where nobody walked at night. If a car came through here, they wouldn't see me until it was too late. I thought about the pickup trucks I'd seen barreling down this road on previous nights, going way too fast, music blaring. They came out of nowhere. I pictured it so clearly it made my chest tight. Headlights cutting through the darkness. The roar of an engine, tires that wouldn't have time to brake. Just impact. My heart pounded. I tried to call out, to yell for help, but my voice came out as a croak, barely louder than a whisper. Nobody would hear me. I looked over at my bike lying on its side a few feet away. The front wheel was bent, the frame twisted. I wasn't riding that home. I was stuck here, alone, bleeding. And every second I stayed in the road, I was in danger. Then I heard it, a low rumble in the distance. Faint but unmistakable, an engine. My pulse spiked. I had to move. Now, adrenaline surged through me, cutting through the pain and the dizziness. I wiped the blood out of my eyes with the back of my hand and focused. I pushed myself up with my right arm, ignoring the way my shoulder screamed. I got my knees under me, but my head spun so badly I almost collapsed again. No, keep going. I dragged myself forward inch by inch, away from the center of the road. My knees scraped against the rough asphalt, tearing through my scrub pants. My left arm dangled, useless and throbbing. The sound was getting closer. Definitely an engine. I couldn't tell how far away it was, but I didn't have time to figure it out. I crawled faster, using my right arm to pull myself along. Every movement sent jolts of pain through my body, but I didn't care. I just kept moving. My fingers touched grass. Wet, cool grass. Relief flooded through me. I hauled myself the last few feet, collapsing onto the narrow strip of lawn that bordered the road. I rolled onto my back, chest heaving, staring up at the sky. The sound faded. It wasn't a car after all. Just the hum of an air conditioning unit from one of the half-finished houses nearby. But the fear didn't go away. I was off the road now, but barely. My whole body shook. I lay there in the damp grass, too exhausted to move, too scared to close my eyes. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer. My breathing slowly evened out. The pain in my shoulder was constant now, a deep throbbing ache that made me feel sick. I turned my head to the side and saw the road empty and dark. My bike was still there, a twisted shadow in the middle of the pavement. I needed to assess the damage. Carefully, I moved my right hand to my forehead. The bleeding had slowed, but the gash was swollen and tender. I pressed gently around the edges. It didn't feel too deep, but head wounds always bled like crazy. My shoulder was another story. It was swollen, hot to the touch, and I couldn't lift my arm more than a few inches without wanting to scream. Not broken, I didn't think, but badly sprained or dislocated. My legs were scraped up, my knees raw and bleeding, but they worked. I tested them, bending each one slowly. Everything hurt, but nothing felt shattered. I looked back at the bike. There was no way I was riding that home. I'd have to leave it and come back for it tomorrow if it was still here. Right now, I just needed to get home. I was still half a mile away, maybe more. I pushed myself up into a sitting position, then slowly, agonizingly got to my feet. The world swayed, but I locked my knees and stayed upright. I cradled my left arm against my chest and took a step. Then another. I could do this. I had to. Each step was a battle. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and my vision kept going fuzzy around the edges. I walked along the grass, staying off the road, one hand clutching my injured shoulder. The night air felt cooler now, or maybe that was just the shock setting in. I passed dark houses, empty lots, construction signs that glowed faintly in the moonlight. I had to stop every few minutes, leaning against a streetlight pole or a mailbox, just to catch my breath. My face was sticky with dried blood. My scrubs were torn and filthy. I must have looked like I'd crawled out of a horror movie. But I kept going, one foot in front of the other. The pain became background noise, something I acknowledged but pushed past. I thought about my apartment, my bed, the first aid kit under the bathroom sink. I thought about calling my mom in the morning, hearing her voice. I thought about how lucky I was that I could still walk, still think, still move. It could have been so much worse. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw them. The lights of my apartment complex, glowing like a beacon in the distance. I wanted to cry. Instead, I forced myself to keep walking. Past the last stretch of empty road, past the corner store that was closed for the night, past the row of parked cars. Up the stairs to my building. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. When the door finally opened, I stumbled inside and shut it behind me. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the most comforting thing I'd heard all night. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and just sat there. Safe. I was safe. The tears came then, hot and fast, and I didn't try to stop them. I sat there on the floor of my tiny apartment and cried until I had nothing left. Then I pulled myself together. I crawled to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the person staring back. My face was streaked with blood and dirt. My left shoulder was twice its normal size, already turning a deep purple. The gash on my forehead was ugly but not as bad as I'd feared. I cleaned it carefully, wincing as the antiseptic stung. I wrapped it with gauze and tape, then swallowed 3 ibuprofen and chased them with a glass of water. I peeled off my ruined scrubs and stepped into the shower, letting the cold water wash away the blood and the sweat and the fear. Afterward, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My whole body ached. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the road, felt the impact, heard the phantom sound of an engine that never came. I thought about how close I'd come. If I'd hit my head harder, I might have blacked out. If a car had come by in those 10 minutes I was lying there, it would have been over. No story to tell. Just a body on the road. The next morning, I called in sick. I went to urgent care where they confirmed nothing was broken. Severe bruising, a mild concussion, a sprained shoulder, I'd heal. 2 weeks later, I went back and got my bike. It was still there, rusted and bent. I had it fixed, but I never rode it at night again. A month after that, I bought a used car. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I still think about that night sometimes. The darkness, the silence, the feeling of being completely, utterly alone. I'm grateful I made it home. Grateful for every single step that got me there.